Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Oppenheimer. This is Christopher Nolan's sort of big biopic about the godfather of the atomic bomb. And when I start this movie, and it's weird that this is a blockbuster that lots of people are seeing with giant sodas. What is wrong with all of you? It's 3 hours, you're not going to die. I don't get that, but whatever. It is moving. In a way, this is one of the most fascinating ways I've seen someone project history. This movie's really moving quite quickly. It moves and is edited more like an action movie, especially at the beginning. It really is we're going to go through all this boring science shit, but we're going to edit it like you're watching a chase sequence or something. I was a little taken aback, but I was also surprised. I'm like, this is really easy to get into. Most biopics are fairly boringly staged and edited and put together, and we need to capture the time, and this is not. Christopher Nolan's not interested in that, while also very much capturing the time while editing it really quickly. I like it when filmmakers actually do that. It felt like he was engaging with the audience on their terms, not sort of almost talking down to them in usually a movie that doesn't have the intelligence to really be able to do that. Most biopics are not that smart, and this is very much trying to talk about big ideas, talk about the atomic bomb. Should we have made it in itself? The men who made it and went forward with this and their determination against the Nazis in World War II, and everything that has to do with that. I think Christopher Nolan is trying to say something about the men who created them, the idea of the atomic bomb, the evil thing that they created, and what the future held for all of us. But at the same time, I think this film picks a perspective on the atomic bomb, on Robert Oppenheimer, on that story, and doesn't talk about a lot of things because it is in that perspective. And I think Christopher Nolan and any director picks a perspective that is, they feel, the perspective that they want to tell a story for. And that is really what anyone who's making any art should do. They should be talking about it from the perspective they choose. And I'm not disagreeing with that idea. But the perspective you choose says something about you, how you feel about these things, how you feel about these issues, how you feel about the women in his life. And that is maybe not as complex as the ideas he is dealing with. And as much as I actually, when I was in it, really was into this movie, it really moves better than a Fast X, which is insane to me. I think in terms of filmmaking, he has really outdone himself in making one of the more important issues of our time be this much of pop cinema. Speaks highly to the talents that he has, that he's able to do that and he wants to do that. I actually think that if we really think about it on an artistic level, that is actually sort of important. But I also think is we're not talking on Twitter about nuclear disarmament. We are not having complex discussions on the nuclear bomb after this movie. And part of me thinks that this movie kind of brings up all these ideas while not having the impact to have those ideas go further as much as I think we would all like them to be. And I also think to not show the complications of what he wrought while also having that eat him up inside at the same time. Now, this is of course about Robert Oppenheimer, and we have kind of three perspectives for the most part, although it bumps around because Christopher Nolan is still into the nonlinear thing that everyone else stopped doing, but he's real good at it, so I get it. This has three timelines. One is Christopher Nolan, straight biopic, leading up to him making the atomic bomb, spoilers, but not really. The other is him being kind of questioned because his security clearance is being revoked around the time of McCarthyism. And the third is a swearing in of a person who's going to be the director of commerce, played by Robert Downey Jr. Those three go between each other. Robert Downey Jr. one is in black and white. The security clearance thing, I think, is a little more blown out. For the most part, it looked like a different film stock to me, or at least it was color corrected. I'm not sure how he did that. And then the other one is a little darker and more, typical Christopher Nolan. And they kind of converge talking about the Manhattan Project, Los Alamos, making the atomic bomb, and the aftermath of that. I do like this for a certain degree. I don't think I am, unlike pretty much every film critic on here, a huge Christopher Nolan guy. I sort of see them out of mostly obligation. I like a certain amount of them. He's not a big thing for me personally. I'm not aggravated by it. I get that people like him, I don't watch these to like take them down or something. He's not my thing necessarily. I did really like Dunkirk and Memento, and there's certain ones I do actually like quite a bit. But I think with this, and when I was talking about the perspective, it is from Oppenheimer's perspective, and I get that. And I get the point of that. And that's one of the most fascinating perspectives, possibly of all humanity. And I'm not going to deny Christopher Nolan that is a very smart way to do it, obviously. But with that perspective, you're sort of ignoring certain things. Christopher Nolan movies are kind of overcast, but I will say he utilizes that overcasting better than most people do. Sometimes I'm like, I guess this is the Cecil B. DeMille of our time, and instead of talking about Moses and crap, or, the railroad, we're talking about the nuclear bomb in a much more serious way. I don't think Christopher Nolan is Cecil B. DeMille, but he casts certainly like he used to. He does do well with this cast, but it is like suddenly somebody pops in you didn't expect. My personal favorite actually was James Remar from like The Warriors. I was like, hey, it's that guy. That was the only one that really... Everyone's talking about Josh Hartnett and stuff, and they were good, but like that was the one I was like, I like that he's in here. I like The Warriors. But everyone's very good, from Josh Hartnett. I think we've never seen him like that before, and it's been a little bit since we've seen him in a huge movie like this, I believe. Cillian Murphy, I think, was good, but is sort of playing this very like 40s tone thing, which some places I think Christopher Nolan knows the 40s and 50s very well. In other times, I think he very much portrays it through his own lens, and it sort of like gets into this weird thing. But I think Cillian Murphy gave the kind of lead he's been waiting to do. David Krumholtz, who's in the Santa Claus movies, and I thought Freaks and Geeks, but everyone, and my wife says 10 Things I Hate About You. He had Matt Damon, sort of reminded me of No Sudden Move. Casey Affleck, I was like, oh, we're doing this still, but he was creepy at least. Dane DeHaan, I was surprised by. Josh Peck. I'm probably forgetting certain people. Robert Downey Jr. reminded me why actors liked Robert Downey Jr., which is sort of bizarre now. He played so much of Tony Stark for so long. You kind of just thought that was his auto mode. And I know part of that is like he didn't actually do any other roles, so I blame him for that mostly. But he was notably good in this movie, and I hope he continues to expand on different roles and like plays around for once, because I miss that Robert Downey Jr. a lot. He was very good. But one of the things with that perspective is the female roles in this, Florence Pugh and Emily Blunt. I do not understand why either, other than it being a Christopher Nolan movie, because they would take these roles. I think it kind of becomes like, I think she almost like is so dependent on him in certain cases, and it's like so much from her perspective, she loses her humanity. Emily Blunt's character, it felt like, one thing I will say, an observation I noticed when I was watching it, is they're riding horses and she's talking about how she's married to this guy, to this guy, to this guy. And if Barbara Stanwyck had played that film in the 40s, that part, she would have commented on how it's ridiculous that she has to be married to all these guys, but that's how life sadly is at this time. That she would have said something. And Emily Blunt doesn't say anything. She didn't write it, obviously. But like Christopher Nolan doesn't add that in there. And I kind of wish they had done more with her role. It felt like some of it was unearned. Some of it I thought like, do we need Emily Blunt in here? Like, it felt, that was the only part I felt like it was sort of overcast, because like I didn't feel like that whole thing really worked. And because it was so much in his perspective and so much about all these other things, she gets kind of shafted on there. And I didn't really like when they kind of have like a, oh, she's gonna fight for a man sort of thing. Like, that didn't really like work with the character. It felt like sometimes she's like these random beats, and I get maybe that was his point for the whole thing, but like the fact that like his two great loves were suddenly like these like very much sacrificial lambs in terms of the entire film, and I felt like they almost were more about showing these moments in his life than actually being characters. Maybe that's like a point he was trying to make, but I think that goes back to like what this perspective is like, you do the atomic bomb and you don't see Nagasaki or Hiroshima. You do not see what happened with those atomic bombs. When they're looking at images of it, you see them reacting to it, but you don't see the images. There's nothing in this film that shows you anything that happened to those atomic bombs. And I think like, as much as you want to get into the moral thing of this film, which is to bring up, is America to be trusted with the atomic bomb? Could anyone be trusted with the atomic bomb, or the idea of destroying the world, if they could? And that is certainly part of the atomic bomb, obviously, the issues with it. But that we don't show it kind of goes into like America's whole thinking on the nuclear bomb, which I've never loved or think it is an important or moral argument that we were sort of like justified, even if he voices the point that like we're more justified because if it had been the Nazis that would have been horrible, and like yes, agreed, certainly, but the also idea that like Japan was probably gonna like surrender, that we definitely didn't need to do this, that we like opened a huge can of worms that we can never close up ever again. It's also that if you watch a film from Japan, they want to deal with what happened to them, right? If you look at Barefoot Gen, if you look at Godzilla, if you look at like so many films have like dealt with these issues in Japan for a long fucking time, by the way. The first Godzilla movie is pretty old, you know, from the 50s, and you're telling me that, again, America refuses to sort of deal with it. We can deal with slavery, we can deal with all these other issues cinematically, but like to deal with the atomic bomb is like always a monologue, or always like disgust, or like, you know, oh well, we had to do it but we feel super bad about it, you guys. And like that I don't like, and I don't think is the right moral decision ever. Like we should have to deal with that shit. That is pretty horrible what we did as a country. I don't like, if you say like, well, that's what we had to do, yeah, okay, if you really believe that, but why are we always ignoring this? And it's because I think no one wants to deal with the fact that we're the country that is the only one, as of right now, and I hope only ever, has dropped an atomic bomb on not one city, but two. And like, why are we not dealing with that? And as much as like, I don't like that at all about this movie. And before it was coming out, I was worried. I'm like, is he just not going to show it? And he didn't. And it's like, I get that he feels like really broken up about it, and that's part in the movie. And you could say, oh, well, his perspective is he didn't get to see what happened. He didn't, you know, there was no real like footage or something because it was the 40s. And I'm just like, I'm a little disappointed in that. And I do feel like the movie's building to the point where, look what we have done, and now we've given this to someone and now they're going to use it. And then instead of dealing with that, we're dealing with like his security clearance in the 50s and like what's going to happen to this guy who's going to be the director of commerce, which I could not name you who the director of commerce is now or give a shit about them. And it's just strange because I guess it's saying like, you know, as much as you can have these great minds come up with these great things, sort of these silly petty arguments is ultimately what will take it down, that American politics is not complex enough to deal with this complex of a moral issue that could destroy, you know, all of existence for us humans. And like that, I totally understand what he's saying with it, but I don't think that that's appropriate for this. I don't like to review a film about what it's not about, but what it's not about in this case is like one of the worst things anyone's ever done in the history of, you know, humanity at this point at least. And hopefully it never goes beyond that. And I think that like the fact that you're not dealing with that and the fact that he chose to not do that says something. And I think it says like my issue with like talking about this and like acting like, you know, the justifiable actions or something. I think I like that it did bring up that like, yeah, it's justified, but it's only justified because the other option is so much worse. And you're like, okay, but like it still really sucks. It's like, there's no way around that this is horrible. There's certain parts of this film I really do like. I like how it showed history. I like how it made history and World War II and all the old dads who'd complain that like, I don't know some battle in World War II and what happened in it and stuff, should be very happy that Christopher Nolan made an Oppenheimer movie that everybody's seeing and like quoting on Twitter and like making TikToks about and stuff like that. I think that's really amazing, and I cannot stress how much I think that shows he's a very smart filmmaker in that regard and how this moves. And it didn't do like certain biopic moments until James Remar shows up. I was like, oh my god, it's like a regular biopic. Like, what happened? Did everybody get tired or something? I don't know. I think Christopher Nolan's a good director. I think he's a very good technical director. I just don't think he thought about the full story of what he's saying. It's like he picked a perspective, he picked an idea. It's like great minds can be taken out by these certain people. I think there's like a certain level of like fountainheadness to that I don't love. I don't like love the idea of creative people. Like, you know, we could have our true genius if it wasn't for these people who are so petty and stuff. And I was like, yes, but it just like it brings up all these weird morals that I'm like, you had such an important story to tell. Why talk about how unable American politics are to do things? I live in America. I know that like all the time forever. Don't worry. It's really abundantly clear. And I would argue that like I am not hearing enough about like people are bummed about the bombs and stuff like that, but I'm not hearing enough about like why aren't we talking about nuclear disarmament? How many nuclear bombs does the US even have? Like we're not talking about those issues at all. And I think like when I look at a film like How to Blow Up a Pipeline that came out earlier this year that is actually absolutely political and talking about those issues and giving you actual links and information while also being a really compelling narrative, I have to fault this on the fact that I think it brings up that like Oppenheimer realized what he wrought, but I don't think it is saying what I think maybe largely politically this, when you have this much of a spotlight with this kind of an issue, that you're kind of going into this, you're like, yeah, I mean, that would really suck if you were the guy who made the Manhattan Project. And now I'm thinking about how horrible that is to a certain degree, but I'm seeing more people talk about, oh, the Robert Downey Jr. thing, which didn't, I liked how that was done. I liked also Alden Ehrenreich. I didn't bring him up before. I'm glad that he's back. He was really good in it, but I just don't agree with that personally, and I feel like this is too much of an important issue. Like it is potentially the final issue for all of us, and like if you're going to go into that, I just think not showing it, not dealing with those issues while he's sort of like dealing with it internally, like yeah, I can feel that he is bummed and he realized what he did, but like actually showing it when you're actually showing everything else and just sort of like mentioning this thing just feels off. And I think it shows kind of a fault in his intellectualism that he, and his filmmaking, that he can't have us deal with what humanity has actually wrought and what America has wrought and what Oppenheimer has wrought. Because we're not really dealing with it. We're dealing with like these politicians don't know what they're doing and are petty and shitty. I also think the Gary Oldman part, here's another actor I forgot about. There's a Gary Oldman scene where he plays Truman that I think is almost like says what the Robert Downey Jr. part says much better. And had you not even had the Robert Downey Jr. part and just had that, you probably could have communicated that perfectly well. But, Chris Nolan has to have various timelines and stuff, and that's, good for him. But I think it says a lot about him as a filmmaker that he can make this film be as exciting as Tenet or Inception and be about Robert Oppenheimer. I don't mean to say this as like he is not as much of a storyteller as he is like a technical director, because I think he is a storyteller. And I think he was telling a story, and I definitely understood that story. I just think this is too much of an important issue to sort of like waste it on an ultimate moral that wasn't, I think, as important as maybe he thinks it is. He definitely doesn't like, suits and executives. I get that. But I think the atomic bomb is a larger story than that. And and I was thinking about that during this film. So I do think in a certain regard, and I think I got into this moral quandary almost with myself internally, where while I'm watching it, I am thinking about like how like this is tremendously scary. And I'm thinking about when bombs would go off and like if you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, you can just like get burned to death and stuff like that. But another part of me is thinking, I'm more thinking about a clip of Barefoot Jen that I saw on Twitter than I am this, but I'm still dealing with the fact that like these people, like where did the intellect of man get us? And like as much as like we've had tortured genius movies, this is one of the few where it's like your tortured genius led humanity here and you have to deal with it. I do think it communicates that. So I'm sort of like split and very mixed on this film. I do think a lot of it is very compelling. I might watch it again at some point because I do have very mixed emotions on the whole thing and feel like you should have to show that. And it's like weird in an Oppenheimer movie, you just like wouldn't. It just feels sort of like you're missing a major piece of the puzzle there. So I hope people leave this and really think about these things that every country has and why it was started, but also why it continues. And there's certain parts of this like, no, we're going to continue this. That you realize how evil and terrible humanity is. And I think like there's a larger case to be what humanity did with the nuclear bombs and less of a case of, oh no, the director of commerce took down Robert Oppenheimer's security clearance. It feels like almost Robert Oppenheimer's story. He's telling the Robert Oppenheimer story, but it feels like the story of the atomic bomb is a larger story that they sort of just let go to tell this smaller story about like how the U.S. government is so petty and so not set up for these complex issues, and how he was trying to sort of minimize this from going that much further, how horrible this is. but I kind of think like you have to show what the horrible thing is. You know, it's kind of like if we have to see, you know, you having sex with Florence Pugh in an investigation room for some reason, then I think you can show a nuclear bomb. I just think like how he did it is still very good, but I just think like avoiding that shows a very American perspective. He's half American, by the way. You don't need to say he's British. It's a very American perspective to not deal with what we wrought and not deal with what Oppenheimer himself did. And I get sticking with that perspective, but sticking with that perspective and not showing something tells very much about the storyteller that chose not to tell the thing that is why we're actually seeing this movie and this guy is so important. Makes you think of that we live in the consequences of something that this movie doesn't really want to talk about, but it compels you in such a way you know it is definitely saying something, but it's not really fully saying what maybe we need to be hearing for a movie that's about something as important as something that can destroy us all. I think it doesn't do enough to tell you and warn you and show you and horrify you as much as it tells you everyone who made it is troubled by their decisions, but we should be troubled by the decisions of the past when we're leaving something like Oppenheimer, not seeing how sad he is that those decisions were made by him. So if you have seen Oppenheimer and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.